Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Samso. I'm here with Scott Williamson from Blackstone Minerals. Blackstone has a project, the main project at the moment is in Vietnam. But Scott, maybe thanks for agreeing to come on Coffee with Samso. And maybe you can start, just give us a brief about yourself and what your history, and then lead into the project, I guess.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Really excited about the format, and
You're
great.
a guinea pig.
Yeah, yes. It's I think good to talk about mining and a coffee. So I started my mining back in the School of Mines in Kalgoorlie. So I started in 2001. I left school and spent about 4 or 5 years at uni and studied mining engineering and commerce, and now found myself sort of running a mining exploration company, which is a little bit different for a mining engineer. But over this sort of journey over the last sort of 18 months, I've sort of fallen into what looks like it could be a mining project. So pretty excited to really get into this Vietnam asset and see what we can do, and maybe sort of dust off the old mining engineer's handbook and maybe develop a mine, which would be pretty exciting. But so we sort of started out initially looking for cobalt in Canada, and that we had a good run there, and
So did everybody else.
Yeah, we were we were sort of lucky that we sort of got onto that at the right time, and unfortunately that has turned against a lot of us, and we're still really excited about our cobalt project in Canada, but the market sort of had other ideas, which is fine, and we'll still work that up in the background, and there's a lot of good work that we want to do there, but unfortunately, the market sort of follows the spot price, and so the spot price of cobalt went from sort of $95,000 a tonne to currently about $30,000 a tonne. So the market, I suppose, went against us a little bit there, but we think that cobalt's still a great place to be over the longer term, and that's why we're continuing to work up that asset. But really excited about the new acquisition, which is the Ta Khoa Nickel project in Vietnam. So yeah.
I think touching on the cobalt, the sort of, what they call the prevalent thinking is that the nickel sulfate kind of nickel story is a stronger one that's got a bit more legs to run. From sort of an observer from outside. Do you guys feel that? Sure, cobalt has it run, but coming back from 90 something down to, is it 30 now?
30.
There are views about where it should be and where will it be, but I think nickel story hasn't really kicked on. It's been threatening to move, and that's why I like the nickels, especially the nickel sulfides story, which is what you guys have out there. And, it is a good mining structure. You got the good assets there. You got all the infrastructures in place. Good infrastructure too. People should sort of take that into consideration. But what is your thought on this nickel price? People saying in a couple of years' time it's going to take off. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that currently the battery market for nickel is very small, and so the current sort of movement in the nickel price hasn't really started to, I suppose, reflect the demand that's coming from batteries and electric vehicles. So we think this is a story that plays out over the next 3 to 5 years. So and the nickel price will sort of start to reflect that in due course. But there's potentially some buying of nickel and speculation of what's about to happen. So the LME warehouse stockpiles are reducing significantly. We think that there's potentially battery manufacturers that are sort of stockpiling nickel because it's going to be difficult to find nickel sulfide particularly in 3 to 5 years' time. So nickel sulfide is one of the most difficult metals to explore for and discover. So Nickel laterite is more abundant, but it's more difficult to process. So with a nickel laterite, you have a technical sort of hurdle, which is the metallurgy associated with that, whereas sulfides are much easier to process, and the metallurgy is much more conventional. So unfortunately though, they're a lot harder to find. The good thing about the Vietnam asset is that the nickel sulfides were discovered back in 1960s, and in the early 1990s they sort of moved towards modern exploration techniques, and they discovered a significant amount of nickel. And the previous owners have spent over $100 million on capital infrastructure, and that's $100 million I don't need to find. But also the previous owners weren't focused on exploration, so they went to the first target, drilled it, explored it, understood it, mined it, and then stopped exploring. So the whole time that they were mining, which was only 3.5 years, there wasn't any exploration for the next deposit. So most mines in Australia and around the world, you're always exploring for the next I suppose extension to the mine life. That didn't happen, and they got to the end of the mine life and stopped mining, and they put this processing facility on care and maintenance, and it's ready to go. So we can turn this back on fairly quickly, but the plan for us is to really understand the geology before we do that, and so there's 25 targets that haven't been tested. There's a large disseminated body right next to the existing underground mine. So this is an underground mine that's been built as if it was in Australia. So it's been run by Australian contractors, it's been built to Australian standards, as has the processing facility or the concentrator. So our plan is to, before we turn it back on, really understand the geology, make sure we understand the mining and the metallurgy before we move it into the next stage. So another key part of what we're looking at is the downstream process that can produce a nickel battery product. So whether that's a nickel sulfate or a nickel hydroxide or an intermediate product that can then be fed into the battery market. So when this mine was put into care and maintenance, the battery, I suppose, revolution or electric vehicle revolution hadn't started, and so the previous owners weren't sort of focused on the downstream process as much as we will be. So the other reason we're looking to go downstream is because there's a tariff on concentrate. So what's happening in Asia and also Africa is that the governments are forcing miners to move downstream through processing. And the Vietnamese government have done this through a tariff. So it's a 20% tariff on concentrate. And the previous owners paid that tariff, so they paid the government $65 million. And our plan is to move downstream and then remove that tariff, and we'll improve the economics of the overall project, but also we'll increase jobs and we'll also inject a significant amount of capital into the country to produce that downstream product. So yeah, there's a bit of work ahead of us, but the first things we need to look at are exploration and geology. Then we'll move into the mining and the metallurgy.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess in some sense, the fact that you guys are looking downstream is a different point of view of how to make this project work. A lot of projects that you get, people have refurbished projects, go back and do the same thing, and the problem with that, in my view, is that that the cost margin's the same. 20 years ago you went broke for a reason. 20 years later you're going to go broke for the same reason if you do the same thing, because price and cost sort of follow each other. So it's good that you're looking at these kind of concepts. It just gives it that different view, that a different opportunity, I think, from an investor point of view. I mean, Asia is Vietnam is, we all know from that part of the world, it's quite tough to work with. I think we touched on some of the ways that you guys look at, to go forward. I think also the fact that nickel, you're in the market space. You're stone's throw to Japan, Korea, China. I think that could just give that cost of issues a sort of a lesser degree of importance. Not to say it's not important, but a lesser degree. Do you agree with that kind of thinking?
Yeah, so there's a lot of benefits of being in Vietnam. The labour cost is some of the lowest labour costs in the world, and it's actually one of the most preferred jurisdictions for manufacturing. So a lot of large manufacturing companies are moving out of China into Vietnam because of the lower labour costs. So it's a great place for us to sort of move downstream because we can do things at a much lower capital requirement, but also lower operating costs as well. So yeah, with this I suppose downstream process, it's all about increasing the payability on the nickel. So one of the things that a lot of people don't realise is that the nickel miners often don't get 100% payability. They're looking at less than 100%. So what the downstream process is all about moving towards 100% payability on your nickel. And the further we can get towards a final nickel battery product, then the closer we can get to 100% payability. And then if we can counteract that with low labour costs and low capital hurdles, because we're in Vietnam, then it just really helps with those economics. I suppose the difference it being that there is an established mining industry, so we're not sort of going into a region that doesn't have mining and doesn't understand mining. They definitely understand mining, but they do want to force, I suppose, companies into that downstream process, which we believe is a good thing because of those low labour costs and the low sort of requirements to move that towards that downstream product.
I think that's quite common now in Southeast Asia. The Indonesians did that with their commodities and to force people to actually add value in country as opposed to shipping out ore. I don't think it's any different in any other Southeast Asian countries to say that. I mean, that section, that part of sort of northern Vietnam is as well known, is quite rich in commodity. Mining activities is quite common there. Do you think that's going to give you that upper hand in terms of future exploration targets or success, you want to put it that way?
Yeah, the geology is probably some of the best we've seen. We've mined and explored all around the world, and this is sort of the type of geology that you sort of expect in Australia maybe 100 years ago, that's just completely untouched. And the reason it's been untouched is
Another one's coming.
Yep, fantastic.
Thanks.
Can't have coffee with Samso without coffee.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's a rift zone that goes all the way into China, and as soon as you get to the border, there's nickel mines lined up all through China in the same geology. So the only reason I believe that there's not more mines on the Vietnamese side is probably because of this tariff. But the reason being is that other operators or previous owners were capital constrained. And what the plan for us is to bring in a partner that can help fund these downstream processes. And we believe that partner will be someone that's associated with the battery industry. So it's being so close to South Korea, China, Japan, it gives us a really, I suppose, good foundation to bring those partners in. LG Chem, for instance, are looking to build batteries in Haiphong, which is 350 kilometres away from the mine site. So they're injecting $2 billion into Vietnam to build batteries, and the reason being is it's one of the best manufacturing hubs in the world. So they've seen that opportunity. They now need to look for the raw materials, and so they I suppose are a potential partner for us. There's the opportunity geologically is it's as good as we've ever seen. So what we're looking for is a magmatic nickel sulfide, and that's similar to Jinchuan or Norilsk or Voisey's Bay, Nova Bollinger. These are some of the best nickel, copper, platinum, palladium and cobalt deposits in the world, and the reason we like this geology is because this is the type of geology that gives you large world-class deposits, and we think that's what we're after.
Yeah, in terms from the nickel space, I always like nickel sulfide because obviously you get better grades, you get continuity much better. As you touched on before, it's easy for you to extract the metal out. And there's abundance of nickel laterites in the world, but there's also a reason why they're still in the ground and not happening. I mean, you look at the Kambalda stuff that we have here. It's even during the bad times, they are still producing. So it's like Western areas. I think their grade is like 9,
yeah, but towards 10, yeah,
10%. So you know, I remember sitting there watching it, and I think, geez, I never knew these things existed. You know, so during the bad time, I can see that the ones that have those kind of good projects are still moving, whereas the ones that are sort of sub-economic tend to slow down. You know, so that's why I sort of mentioned the change in how you look at the projects can add that few percent to the story, if you want to put it that way. I mean, you also have something, I quite like it, but I think in terms of size, comparative to the Vietnamese stuff, it may be a bit smaller, but the ones that you have in WA, I mean, it's a nice nickel story. I mean, I love exploration, and I always think that, you know, it's where you get the big value add, you know, the big hit, but maybe touch on that, because I quite like that project down there.
Yeah,
I like the story anyway.
It is an interesting one, because our core business is greenfields exploration, and the only reason we're not drilling greenfields targets is because the market is just not quite there for that. And so we listed on what is the Silver Swan South project, and it's 10 kilometres south of Silver Swan, but it's 8 kilometres along strike of Canal Belt. So this is, talk about world-class geology, this is probably some of the best geology you'll find for gold and nickel anywhere in the world. So we're looking for komatiite style nickel sulfide, which is a little bit different to that magmatic type, but can still produce that very high grade and potentially higher grade than, say, a magmatic system. So the Silver Swan mine in its day was a 10% nickel mine, and actually the first ever mine I worked at, and I remember seeing just whole faces full of this shiny metal and being high grade nickel sulfide. It's quite remarkable how even as a colourblind mining engineer, I could see the nickel, and so we're looking for high grade nickel sulfides. There's a 10 kilometre package of ultramafics. We picked it up for the nickel, but then our first couple of aircore programs, we were getting some really good gold numbers as well. So it's interesting. The gold sits almost on top of the nickel, but just to the west of it, and there's a shear zone coming in from what we believe is the Fitzroy shear zone from Canal Bell. So that's a really good potential conduit for gold as well. So we're looking for high grade nickel sulfides. We've got 2 big geochem signatures for nickel, copper, cobalt, platinum, palladium, arsenic, all the right signatures for a sulfide ore system. The other thing that's exciting about this project in Silver Swan South is that it's under a lake. So what we're seeing in Australia is the best and the biggest discoveries of recent times are under cover, and particularly some of them are under lake cover down near Kambalda. So we're under a lake cover. So if there is something to be discovered here, there's a reason why it's still there, and it's because previously there was no outcrop and no signs of any mineralisation under the lake. So we've had to drill air core down to as deep as 100 metres to get to the basement and take a sample of the basement geochem. And so that's how we've got these good geochem signatures. And there's no holes into fresh rock. So there's previous explorers have only done air core, and we've done 2 rounds of air core ourselves, and so the next step for us is to just start those deeper holes, downhole EM. So we don't think EM will penetrate through the lake cover, so it's all about drilling deeper, downhole EM, vectoring into the massive sulfides. So yeah, at the moment we'd probably classify that as our 3rd priority project, because the cobalt asset in Canada is still a significant asset, and we're progressing that as well. Hopefully we get some time and some money to attack the Silver Swan South asset, because and potentially even build it out as well, because there's some great ground around that Black Swan concentrator we think that can really add value to that project as well, and now's the time to be picking up ground before this nickel sort of boom happens over the coming years, I think. So
yeah, I think what I like about you guys is when I first got to know you, probably when you had a presentation in Singapore, and you were selling the cobalt story, and you were doing quite well in share price. I think you were in the 40s or 60s or something.
40 to 50, maybe even 60.
Yeah. But you know what is good about you guys, even though you know that sort of didn't pan out the way everybody wanted to, but you did do what you're going to do, and you raised the money, and you had the story, and you went after it. I think that's all an investor can ask for, really. So I think it's this one in Vietnam is really interesting. I mean, it's you're a mining scenario. You get your geology right. I think the price will come. I if it's not 12 months, could be 2 years, 3 years, but it will come. But it will take you that time to develop it anyway. And I think that's the key. That's the focus. And I think that's what I like about the story. Whether it ends up well or not, no one will ever know now. But I think at least you got the right smoke happening there, which is one of the things why I thought this would be a nice story to talk on. And but yeah, Scott, if you got anything else you want to add on, or do you have anything else?
No, I suppose just on that, we as explorationists, and I think you're spot on with that comment, because if we're not drilling and having a good crack at the geology, then we're not doing our job properly. And that Little Gem asset was a great example of that. We raised $5 million, we drilled it, and we killed it. And what we uncovered is actually some much larger targets.
That's a lesson. Turn your phone off. Sorry, go on.
That's okay. So what we did is we drilled around the Little Gem, and it was a little gem, and unfortunately it wasn't the scale that we needed to build a modern day mine. But then we went back and did our systematic exploration and realised that there's actually a bigger system and a bigger play there, and it's almost too big for a junior, and that's why we're looking for partners on that asset. But it's all about, and so Steve and Hamish, they've been doing this for 20 years. So, and what we do is we drill to kill, and we're not there to sort of muck around. We sort of, it's not a lifestyle here. Like we work very hard and for our shareholders, because our shareholders want results, and they understand the risk reward. So there's a significant risk to what we do, but that's why the upside is so great. So the way I sort of like to, being an ex-mining analyst or stockbroker, I for the people that don't understand what we do, I like to sort of consider the fact that the upside is potentially 10 times your money, but the downside is you halve your money, and that's a lot of people forget that the downside, which is halving your money, and a lot of people aren't ready for that, and that's what happened with this first project. But now we have this opportunity where we've got this new exciting project. We've got a great capital structure. We've only got 150 million shares on issue. We're board of management still own over 20% of the register, so it's nice and tight. We get to go again, and that similar situation occurs now. But what we've got a little bit differently this time is not just an exploration story, but a mining story, and it's more of a macro story as well, because it's all about this electric vehicle revolution, but it's all about moving this towards what could be a downstream process for the battery industry, and that's potentially got significant upside as well. But also we're still keen to deliver with the drill bit and exploration excitement at the same time. So we've got this sort of dual sort of strategy where we'll continue to explore and potentially find a world-class ore body, but also at the same time the existing ore bodies and targets and the existing infrastructure, really leveraging off that and turning this back into a mine that we think it will be over the coming years.
Yeah, I think what is important is about the people that's running it. Technically the project, I mean, we've seen many projects sort of fall off its ass and because of this or because of that, but when you got the right crew there, I mean, Hamish has been doing stuff around, and and for yourself, I've seen it that you actually said you're going to do this, and you did do it, and it just goes on. But the fact that you want to make sure that the actual percentage of delivery, the actual deliverance is done, is key. Well, we'll wrap it up. But thanks, Scott, for coming up and just sharing your thoughts on Blackstone and having a coffee and being guinea pig number 8 or 7, forget now.
My pleasure.
But we're at Cherry and Grapes today, and they got fantastic props. I might come back here and do this.
And good coffee.
And good coffee, definitely. Coffee at Cherry and Grapes, Emerald Terrace. Even though I paid for this. All right, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks for your time.